I've been telling you stories, I've been retelling stories, because except for the exception to that is making up stories with the kids. That's a telling, because it's the first time. But we are a people of stories, and the wisdom, the beauty of that, is that we get to share something of the past and reinvigorate it with our own life experience. I remember when some of us went down to Guatemala, and we went down there. I took a group of teens, a number of the chaperones are here, just looking for Lori Eisenberg. That was our first trip, and we said, should we do this? How will we do it? One thing we're going to do this year that you'll hear about is the same kind of trip, volunteering in Latin America, but for adults. So you'll hear more about that. But one thing I remember is that we were sitting around a televisionless room. We were sitting in places that didn't have television, they didn't have this, nobody did this with their thumbs, nobody had repetitive strain injury from doing strange things like that. But instead what we did was we sat around as a group and we listened to the abuela, we called her the abuelita, this tiny old woman who was a grandmother. Nobody, not she, not anybody in her family or in the community knew her name, but they knew that they owed her reverence. And she was HBO Max, and she was Netflix. And she was NPR, and she was everything else that was telling stories. She would sit and she would be the storyteller. And in the evening when they had candlelight, and even then they had limited electricity, they would entertain each other by listening to the elders. By listening to people who came before them, had richer stories than them, and knowing that one day they would have the honor of being those storytellers. So I want to tell you a story. And the story is of a community where, for some reason that nobody could explain, no timepiece would work anymore. Not a clock and not a watch. Everything stopped. Nobody understood why, but people just gave up on their timepieces. They allowed the innards of them to just get rusty because they sat untouched, unused for so many years, for decades. Everybody knew that their timepieces didn't work until one day a wanderer came through this remote village who was a watch fixer maker, a clock maker, whatever that word is. And the people said, let's do it. They came to the inn. There was a long line leading to the inn where the watchmaker was there, where he was staying. And people would go in hopeful and they'd leave morose, unhappy, with their timepieces rusted inside. He said, there's nothing I can do with these pieces. The insides no longer work. But one woman walked up to the inn and spent a little time inside, and then she came out with a grin on her face, and everybody was puzzled. Why is this woman smiling? Everybody gathered around her, and they said, what happened? How come we're hearing a ticking? How come your timepiece is moving? The pendulum is swinging. What's different about yours? And she says, the only difference, I think, isn't the cost or the value of the timepiece that I have. It's just that ever since it stopped working, every single day I've wound it in the hope that one day it might start working again. I want to ask you to think about the story and the woman and what that means to us. It was her hope. It was her hope. It was her hope that allowed her timepiece one day to be rescued from stillness. It was her willingness to have a belief in the future that was better than the past, that allowed her every day to have the gall, the temerity, the idiocy, you might think, to wind something that doesn't move. But it was that winding of something that didn't move that allowed it one day not to be rusty. So that when the right watchmaker came through town, and who knew that that would happen? It would be her timepiece that would swing back into motion and back into time. Think about time, but think more importantly in this moment about hope. We live in a challenging moment of being human. Fires in Hawaii, rain in August in Chatsworth, a political system that we barely recognize, a world order, the war in Ukraine that's enduring into the second year, a political system that maybe we wonder if it'll hold in the next year under the duress that we'll put it under through a general election that's coming up. All of these things give us the right to be hopeless. They do. All of these things give you the right to have concern about your children, your grandchildren's world, their country. All of these things combined and more, because each of you has your own tsuris, your own worries about the future. All of these things have the right and the place and the strength to shut us down in hopelessness. But think about that word hopelessness. Hopeless doesn't mean the belief that things are bad. That's another word. Hopelessness means we don't believe they can get better. And that's not allowed in our tradition. Hopelessness means we don't believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Hopelessness means that we're looking at the yesterdays and only seeing the rain clouds and not when the sun emerged. Hopelessness means that we've given up the will to wind the clock that day in the hope that one day it might return to action to give us a sense of time. I mentioned to you in passing on Rosh Hashanah in one of the sermons that our lexicon in English has the word hopeless, but Hebrew doesn't have it. Love Hebrew. Love the idea that the wisdom, the language of itself is that it doesn't have a word for hopelessness. Just take that home. Isn't that fantastic? Not biblical, not rabbinic, not medieval Hebrew, and not conversational Hebrew today. We have to formulate words, connecting them to words to come up with the single word that we come to so quickly, so easily in English, which is hopeless. We're, according to the late, great Lord Rabbi, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, we're the people of hope who gave Western civilization hope. Think about that. That was our gift. That was our gift, that Torah gave not just the Jewish people a sense of hope through the struggles that we've had in every generation of being people. But that story evoked and provoked and grew hope in all the people of the Western world. And what was the central narrative of that story? It was that we were once slaves in Egypt, and then one day God delivered us with an outstretched hand, and we crossed a sea which was miraculous. It didn't make sense. It was a watch that would no longer logically, sensibly tell time, and yet we stood on dry sand on the other side and journeyed toward a promised land. There is, in a nutshell, the hope narrative of the Jewish people. But within that story, let me tell you other stories. When we get to the Sea of Reeds, and all of you and I are apparently standing there, according to our tradition, some of us are backing up going, no way. Slavery is all I know. Yesterday will bequeath today. Will just give us another version of it tomorrow. We will endlessly be enslaved. And yet there were people at the shore of the sea saying, why should I hope that Moses, the little Jewish guy with a big stick, is somehow going to do something that hasn't happened in the past? And the story tells us, if we look from the satellite view, the drone view of that moment in our history, that Moses stood, as we know, holding that great staff over the water, and God produced a miracle, and the sea parted, and we walked across. But I think the more interesting story within the story, because it's one that you and I can hopefully relate to and take into this new year of our lives, is that it wasn't a Moses, because we might never be a Moses. And it wasn't a miracle-producing God, because God knows we'll never be that. It was another little, otherwise unknown person. We just know his name. Nachshon, the son of Aminadav. What would that mean to us? Except everything. Because he was the everyman in that story. He was every woman, he was every man, he's every single one of us. The takeaway from that narrative is that one person stood at the shore of the sea, and he stood there and he decided in his sense of hopefulness that he would put his toes in the water, because he knew that somehow a miracle was going to happen, but nothing happened. And you and I have been there. When we put our toes in the water and nothing happened, we said, I'm done with this career, this relationship, this experience, this venture in my life. But Nachshon did the opposite. His sense of hope was so rich, so overwhelming, that he decided to take another step. Now he's up to his knees, and then he's up to his waist, and then he's up to his chest, and yet somehow, imagine the people behind him watching this Meshuggah guy stepping farther and farther into a sea, hoping to cross it to dry land. And then he gets to where it's at his chin, and finally he gets in the story, this midrash, to where it's at his lower lip. And yet what does he do? He steps forward, and we say in the midrash, that's the moment when God parts the sea, and you and I, and our grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents walk to freedom. Think about what it is to be those people. Think about what it is that we are the people who we know because of the Passover narrative didn't have enough time to make bread. Imagine Jews not having enough time to get bread. But we're leaving without food. We don't have bread, but we do have time. The women among us, which is something we should note, had the thought, the gall, the audacity to pack their timbrels. They knew they would be celebrating ahead. Just think about that. Think about that model of hope. When I was living in London, I was living in England for 9 years, in London for 3. I used to listen to a program on the BBC Radio 4 in the morning called Thought for the Day. And I was in my 20s, so I wasn't that interested in thoughts for the day, but sometimes, some days. And I remember I'd listen to Jonathan Sacks often. I'd hear his beautiful his beautiful voice and his wisdom whenever he spoke. And I'd hear the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was regularly on the program. And there was another rabbi that I would hear often in those days, in the 80s, living in London, Hugo Gryn. He was a Holocaust survivor. And Hugo Gryn told the story about when he was a teenager in a grotesquely named concentration camp with his father called Liebe Rose, lovely rose, imagine. And he remembers it was the eve of Hanukkah. And he was with his father in those so-called conditions, those so-called barracks. And his father pulled out a hidden handmade bowl. And in it, he placed his day's ration of margarine. And he'd made a handmade wick to go inside it. And he said to his son, to Hugo, he says, it's Hanukkah. It's the first eve of Hanukkah. We're going to light the candle. And his son protested. He said, Dad, you can't do this. We need food. You need food. You can't give up your ration for a holiday. And his father probably looked him in the eyes and said to him, you and I know from our own experience we can survive 3 weeks without food. We can survive 3 days without water, but we won't survive the next 3 minutes without hope. I look to these stories when I'm challenged in my own hopefulness, when I read the news, when I listen to what's going on in the world, when I look at issues close to home, challenges in my life, because all of us have these challenges, and we wonder, what will tomorrow yield? What will it produce? Will we get through this? Will we be stronger or weakened by it? How will our kids endure this or that moment in their lives? And what gives me the greatest strength, the greatest hope narrative might be that isn't Hugo Gryn or Jonathan Sacks, it's you. Because I've known you for nearly 28 years. And one of the things that I've seen over 28 years is there are in every single row of this sanctuary, and I know online as well, survivors. And there's nothing more compelling or more inspiring when we are struggling to know if tomorrow will be better than today. Nothing more powerful than hearing the story of somebody who's been through that transition from sickness to health. I want to ask you to do something. Participate in this with me. Stand up if somebody, and I include people behind me as well, if you or somebody close to you in your family is a survivor of cancer or another serious illness, just stand up and look around at survivals. Look up behind you as well. I didn't say please rise, but the majority of you are standing. Now look at each other's eyes. Look survivor to survivor, endurer to endurer. Look at people like you who lost sleep at night wondering if tomorrow would be tomorrow. Gain strength that you're going to take into the trials of the next year by these faces and these people and these stories. And you who aren't sitting, who say, thank God that's not my story, take strength because you'll have your own struggles. Of course, you can sit again. These are the stories that we need. These are the stories that strengthen and sustain us. These are the reason we might join communities like this. Maybe we're not people who pray in Hebrew, don't read Torah, don't believe in anything. But maybe what we need to get out of a community of this, of love, of learning, of living together, is a sense that when we go through the struggles, and we will go through struggles, that we have each other, not only to lean on, but to learn from. That we have each other that you and I have each other's living stories, not stories that Netflix will teach us. Netflix will show you an example of survival and of hope, but it won't impact you because it's not human enough. There's a screen between you and it. But when you speak to her and to him and to them, you'll learn that sometimes, with the greatest respect that I have for doctors, they're guessing. When they give prognoses, many of you can tell me, and I'm looking at you in the second row, the doctor says, this is how long you have to live based on that diagnosis. And you say quietly to yourself, he doesn't know me. How many of you were given short-term diagnoses, and yet here you are decades later, Karen Block. There was a man, I remember going to Kaiser, sitting in the waiting room with a family. It must be 20 years ago. And I sat with them, and they said, it's time, according to the doctor, to plan his funeral. And year after year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, he waves at me and says, I'm still here. Those are what we need in our lives. Those will pick us up. We are not the people of hopelessness. We are the people of tikva. Hatikva is our anthem. We didn't choose, oh, say, can you see, that obscure poem. We chose a word and an idea, something that would impassion us toward life, something that would guide us toward better living, something that would remind every one of us that we are a people and have always been a people that have been strengthened by being a people. On this Yom Kippur, I ask you to ask yourself if you have a circle of hopeful people close to you in your life. And if not, get one. Change out a few. Move people around. Make sure that you have a circle of hopeful people. Make sure in this year that it's a strategic decision you make. Because there will be challenges in every day and every year of life. But make a decision today to do an inventory of hopefulness in the people with whom you surround yourself. In family, not always even-keeled in hope. How can it be? It's people. In community, in friendships, in the people we play cards with, golf with, sing with, play with. Ask yourself if you need to add to your collection of life more people who will inspire you with more hope. There were readings in this prayer book today that reminded me of a story, the audacity of hope. You and I may never have been to a place in Austria, high in the mountains, called Semmering. But there was a man called Karl von Gega in 1848 who had an idea, and he said, there's never been a railway, there's never been train travel up in Semmering. And what he did was he designed, he engineered, and he brought on 20,000 people to build the Semmering Railway. That's audacity. You know why? Because at the time when he was building it, there couldn't be train travel in that part of the world. It couldn't happen. But 2 years after they completed the construction of a railway, trains started running in Semmering, and to this day they still do. That's the audacity of hope. That's looking at a sea that hasn't parted and saying, let me have faith and hope and a better understanding who I might be so that I step forward and not backward from challenge. I said last night, and I want to repeat it, that people who think we're weak will give us excuses, and people who know us to be strong will give us challenges. So in this new year that began 10 beautiful days ago, we have the challenge to look at the news with hope, to look at our health with hope, to look at each other with hope, to realize that we are what Isaiah called the people who will be a light unto the nation. And maybe what he meant wasn't just light as in enlightenment, but that you and I would and should in this new year of life be hope bearers in a world that desperately needs it. Gmar Chatima Tova. I want to ask you, in a moment we're going to conclude the service here, please turn around at this moment or at some moment, look to people who work at Shepherd, who lead Shepherd, find them on the way in and out, maybe send them a letter, an email, a note. God, please thank them. These are wonderful, wonderful people who take such good care of us. We look forward to seeing you a year from now, God willing, Shepherd people. Thank you to all of you. To you, I look forward to seeing you at VOS in Calabasas at 2 o'clock for a 12-step gratitude meeting in our annex. You can park in the back. If you've never been to the meeting, it's not an ordinary 12-step meeting. It's not confidential. People will share, knowing there are people who are there to learn from their stories. So I urge you to come. And also at the same time, either in the sanctuary, depending on numbers, or in the boardroom off the lobby, there's going to be a grief support group that will get us ready for Yizkor. We're going to start promptly at 4 o'clock in the sanctuaries, our afternoon service, and then of course Yizkor will come at around 5 o'clock. You'll be eating about 7 o'clock. Okay, everybody, let's sing something. Oh, we have a beautiful song. Just listen to this gorgeous song about the challenges and the beauty of hope.
I've come to sing a song about hope. I'm not inspired much right now, but even so, I came out here to sing a song, so here I go. I guess I think that if I tinker long enough, one might appear. And look, it's here. One verse is done. The work's begun. I've come to sing a song about hope. In spite of everything ridiculous and sad, though I'm beyond belief depressed, confused, and mad, well, I got dressed. I underestimated how much that would take. Didn't break until right now. I sing of hope and don't know how. So maybe I could substitute strength, because I'm strong enough. I got through lots of things I didn't think I could. So did you. I know that's true. And so we sing a song about hope. Though I can't guarantee there's something real behind it, I have to try to show my family I can find it. And so today, when life seems crazy and impossible to bear, it must be there. Fear never wins. That's what I hope. See, I said hope. The work begins.